gosh, it's such a pleasure to be here with Ziraat Bank and all of our wonderful Turkish members of the IIF in Istanbul. Let me echo Tim's thanks for hosting us, and it's an especially opportune time to be having this discussion in a year when there's so much focus on the role of banks and other financial firms in supporting the net zero transition. You know, we were delighted to be here in 2022 for a wonderful sustainable finance forum with the Banks Association of Turkey. And it's been so impressive to see the progress here just over these past few years. You know, thinking back to that conversation we had a couple of years ago with all of you here, what struck me is the level of commitment and the level of ambition. And, you know, every one of our members has set out clear and achievable plans for supporting their clients, their counterparties all over the world in enabling the net zero transition. And also domestically here in Turkey, regionally in the region, and internationally, as Istanbul's role as a global financial center and a green finance hub, I think. I like to think of Istanbul as a real center for green finance. It's just growing rapidly. You know, sustainable finance is so much more than just transforming the energy sector. Yes, that's a key part of solving this problem, right? I mean, I think like 90% of the world's energy still comes from coal, oil, and other fossil fuel sources. That's a huge job we have to transform it. But we've got to make this transition in a way that supports growth. Otherwise, it will be politically impossible to make this happen. We cannot let it slow growth. Climate change is a really political issue, in part because this net zero transition is going to cost money. That money has to come from somewhere. There's not enough public money in the world to pay for it, and nor is there enough private money. It's not really within the mandate of the private sector to be doing philanthropic work, you know, so there has to be a way to mobilize this finance for the climate investment we need. And, you know, we also live in a world of geopolitical tensions, so it's harder and harder to find global solutions for global problems, as the chairman has just said to us. So it's no wonder that big international forums like the G20, you know, as well as our standard setters and regulators, everybody is interested in how the financial sector is supporting climate change and net zero transition. Bank transition plans are being very closely watched. For example, the Financial Stability Board, the FSB, has a new working group on bank transition plans. They held their first meeting in Tokyo. Some of us in the room were there. And they're still fact-finding, the FSB, but it's moving very high on the agenda of our standard setters and regulators. And the same is true on climate disclosure. We now have international standards for climate disclosure, the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB. Any of you who work on reporting and disclosure will be very familiar with these standards. Disclosure around transition plans is a big topic for debate. And how do you measure, you know, the impact of things like Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions? You know, how do you measure the impact of a bank on climate or the impact of a bank on supporting climate finance? It's very difficult, all of these. We got to build markets, sustainable markets, transition finance markets, carbon markets. These are essential for global capital to flow. And we've got to have good policy and effective regulation. We have voluntary initiatives like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ. They're very important as well to supporting the investment environment. And, you know, I think public-private collaboration, so with the multilateral development banks, for example. I know that the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, is going to have a big conference here in Turkey on sustainable finance in October. So an important space to watch is areas like blended finance that bring together public, private, and philanthropic capital. So lots of challenges and opportunities to impact our agenda. Fortunately, we have a terrific panel here today to take us through all of these questions. So let us dive in, and please do. I have a little iPad here, so if you want to submit questions, please do, and we'll get to them. So, Izlem, I want to start with you.
Thank you.
How is the Turkish financial sector approaching all these questions around transition to a net zero economy? Are there big initiatives or public policies that are going to help us scale up this transition finance? And what's Isbank doing?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you here today. Thank you for your kind invitation. As you have mentioned, sustainability is a big issue just for the development of each country. And this is the case for Turkey as well. That's why I want to first start with the macro level, because we are in need of some macro level, let me say, policies in order to stimulate sustainability-related measures in order to maintain a sustainable growth for the long run. We are all aware of the fact that the recent medium-term plan announced by the government was a good opportunity to see that we have several policies targeted in the medium-term plan in order to achieve the net zero transformation of the country, of the economy. This is good to see. And it seems that sustainability is at the heart of the main strategy, not only for the firms, for the companies, for the financial system, but for the policymakers as well. This is good to see. But on the other hand, we are aware of the fact that, especially during the last few years, we are trying to attain an economic stability, especially we are dealing with high inflation problem. So this is another fact of life. If we are targeting to achieve a sustainable economic development, in line also with the targets that has to be realized in order to achieve a net zero economy, I think we have to first implement the prevailing disinflation program. We have to have commitment to continue to implement this program. And it is good to see that the prevailing orthodox policies will help us to control the high inflation, because at the end of the day, being a member of the financial system, it's a fact of life. We are just in the middle of the capital and the real sector. And the investments required for sustainability, for net zero transformation, it requires high investments, and it requires capital allocation. In this case, the feasible capital allocation is not so easy in such a high inflation environment. So the first thing to do, I think, is to attain a sustainable macroeconomic stability. This will be the core issue, I think. But as I mentioned, it is good to see that we are on the right way, and we are expecting a disinflationary period starting from the second half of this year. Then on, it will be much more easy to control or to manage the risks on the investment decisions. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, when we look at the financial sector, we see it's again good to see that there is an evolving regulation system, mainly addressing the sustainability issues of the country, addressing the transformation of the economy. This is good to see. And recently, in 2021, BRSA has already announced the Sustainable Banking Strategic Plan. This is good to see. It will be a good start. And starting from this year, we will be reporting international sustainability reports as Turkish financial system. So we are on the right way, but there is still so much thing to do, especially in line with the banking sector. Board of Capital Markets also taking several decisions. They are announcing several guides, especially in green financing, in green debt issuances. These are good steps that are taken by the policymakers. If I come to Isbank, we are one of the largest private banks in Turkey, and we have the largest loan portfolio. And we are aware of the fact that net zero transition is not just a responsibility for the bank or for the firm itself. It's a responsibility both on the bank side, scope 1, scope 2, but scope 3 is also very important for us. That's why in 2022, we became a member of Net Zero Banking Alliance, and we have our own commitments in transition of net zero economy or net zero bank. According to our commitments, the initial commitment was that by the year 2030, we will be a net zero bank. It is good to see that as time passes, we have already outreached our targets. That's why we are ready to bring our commitment date back to 2026. It is good to see that we will be ahead of our targets. But there is still a lot to do, especially on Scope 3 side, because we have a large loan portfolio. That's why we are trying to help the transformation process in the loan portfolio, the companies that are already taken place in our loan portfolio. In line with the Net Zero Banking Alliance, we have already, let me say, announced our medium-term targets for 3 main industries. One of them is the power generation. We announced that we will be reducing 61% of the emissions in that industry by the year 2030. The second sector is the iron ore and steel, which is a very important industry for Turkey. These are at the same time the leading export industries of Turkey. So we announced a 21% reduction in the emissions of the iron ore and steel industry. And the third one is the cement industry. But these are the initial analysis of us, so that in the coming future, we will be announcing the other targets for the rest of the, let me say, emission-intense sectors for the year 2030. This will be on the agenda of the bank. In terms of escalation of the transition process, I think we all have our own responsibilities, not just the regulatory requirements, but at the same time, as the banks, we are providing products for our customers, products and services for our customers, especially energy efficiency related products are at the top of our agenda. I can say that we have already extended $6.8 billion of loans to the renewable energy projects. That's why today the share of the renewable energy projects in our total project finance loans reached 77%. This is good to see, and we see that the improvement is still going on there. But this is not enough, as I mentioned. There is so much thing to do. And especially if we consider that the large corporates are ready to implement, to take actions for the transition of their companies. But it is not so easy for the SMEs. So SMEs are important because they are at the core of the economy as well. You know, in Turkey, the share of the SMEs in our total exports is 36%. That's why we need to help those companies in their transition process. This will not be limited to providing financial solutions for the companies. So the second important item is not just providing products, but at the same time steering of the companies, especially the SMEs are important. In this sense, we are organizing meetings with the SMEs through all over the country in order to make them have higher awareness of the coming conjuncture. It is good to see that, especially the regulations related to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, they feel themselves responsible for the coming conjuncture. They have increasing awareness there, but there is so much thing to do. That's why this is a long-term journey with each kind of company, and we are willing to provide help, not just the financial side, but as I mentioned, on the steering side as well. But there is an important challenge. We are lacking of standardization. I think this is the very important issue. We are in need of a taxonomy. We will be searching for this taxonomy. We want to be to implement similar standards while assessing our investments, especially in terms of environment and social impact of our investments, of our lending activities. That's why I believe that a standard taxonomy will also help us to reach global funds easily and to attain our long-term targets by the help of those funding that will come to Turkey, taking into consideration that there is a standardized taxonomy in the country. So we are all looking for the coming conjuncture, taking into consideration all these issues.
Really important points you made, and particularly the role of the financial sector. We are not policymakers. Yes. We can't drive or force transition. Right. Yes. The right policies have to be in place for us to be able to finance the transition, which is our job. 2030 is only 6 years away. You were saying targets for 2030. Wow, that's just right around the corner, isn't it? But Mahmut, I wanted to turn to you here. And we're starting to see the effects of climate change more and more every day. And net zero by 2050, it's just more and more critical every day. Yeah. So that's just so much financing and investment that's needed. How much financing are we talking about, and how can we close this financing gap?
Yeah. Let me first start. I'm normally a very positive person, and you will see that throughout the conversation. But the other day, somebody in another panel, in another conference, mentioned about this movie I watched a while ago. It said, "Don't look up." I think it was in Netflix or somewhere I watched. Also, there's steep salon, but behind this, a meteor is coming to the Earth, and there is an urgency to do things to correct this. I think it's a good resemblance in terms of that. Already last year, we have achieved 1.48 degree increase in the temperature. So it was one of the hottest, I think it was the hottest on the record. So it's an important, when we talk about the investment, we need to understand we need to wrap it up the investment as well, and that increases the size of the investment as well, because as technology improves, it's going to be different. And then the scope of investment, right? It's not just decarbonization and climate, and it has other impacts as well, especially, for instance, I need to underline water scarcity as well for countries like us, and 74% of our water goes to agriculture, which is very important for food safety, but the rest is used for industry and houses and personal consumption. And investment needed even in the infrastructure that takes the water to our houses as well. The leakage in the infrastructure is estimated to be 40% in Turkey, for instance. And that is, European average is 25%, some countries is 5%. But as I said, investment is very difficult to predict for the next 30 years because it's very difficult to estimate anything for the next year, right? Even if it's Fed interest rate or anything. But many estimates, I have some colleagues from McKinsey here as well, is in the size of trillions, hundreds of trillions dollars. So one estimate is around, the average is $250 to $300 trillion over the next 30 years until 2050. So it's huge. And then you think about Turkey. Turkey is 1% of the GDP, so we need to invest around $2.5 to $3 trillion. It's huge for our country. So we could be pessimistic about it when you hear these numbers. But for the next 10 years, we need to invest $1.5 trillion. But why I'm not pessimistic about it, as my colleague also mentioned, companies are aware of this issue. And there is a lot of commitments to make it net zero. I think we just need to find talk about the big elephants on the table in the room and how to make it happen. In some cases, we are doing it. For instance, renewable, we'll talk about it. But if we just focus on decarbonization, it's not going to happen by itself, even with the collaboration between public and private. There are other factors. Decarbonization is not the only thing. We need to make it cost-effective, right? It has to be safe. It has to also work for the competitiveness of the companies as well as the country. If you look at all these four criteria, I think the financing need and the collaboration would be easier. But if you ignore the cost side, companies are not going to invest in negative return unless there is a force behind it. There might be cases of that as well. But let's give an example of where it worked. For instance, the electricity renewables. In our country, Alparslan Bey mentioned as well, we have had, and Tim mentioned, I think, about it as well. We had a huge investment in renewables. It continues every year. And it was made it possible by this feed-in mechanism that is also set in the world in different countries. Feed-in mechanism when it is in FX base, and it gives you the constant guarantee for the government to buy the electricity from you. We know that renewables is a positive RORC project, right? High return. But the volatility of the electricity prices is make it very difficult to finance from the bank perspective. Once you take the variation of the electricity prices out of the game, you can easily invest it. That's what happened. And with that structure, it also helped Turkish companies to invest in the manufacturing of solar panels and many parts of the wind power generation as well in our country. And that reduced the cost of the investment, which is the single most important item in investing in solar power generation. It was only 3-4 years ago, it was over $1 million. I like this quote is 600,000, but I hear it's below that as well, depending on the equipment you use, $600,000. So it's a huge decrease, almost half of what it was 3 years ago. Therefore, if you have the right financing mechanism behind and right incentive, economic incentive, it becomes possible. So how can you apply this to other sectors is also important. But with this situation, as Isbank and other banks also have done, we have invested quite a bit in these projects. The ones we were in, we had financed 25% of the total generation. Now, over the next 10 years, this will continue significantly. I would expect even above the numbers Tim mentioned in the power generation capacity of renewables in Turkey. In competitiveness, I think this is where the public and private works even more. You look at China, China has challenges with the US in terms of trade and competitiveness. They have been investing huge on this front as well. Last year, more than 200 gigawatt. Is more than the rest of the world. They invested in solar. And if you think about solar, is the cost of the electricity is behind, even though we don't want to talk too much because that's where it is. For the green transitioning, it's very important for industrial transformation. If China can produce electricity half of the price of US, it's a competitive advantage. If they are producing 80% of the EVs, batteries, lithium and others, it's a competitive advantage. So we need to look at from Turkey perspective as well. We have the many minerals. How can we be competitive and how can we finance that competitiveness as well? And one final thing I like to add is the demand side. Okay. When different surveys, we ask customers whether you want to pay higher for the sustainable product. Half of them say yes. At least most of them say it's one of the important factors. How much do you want to pay? 10, 15%. If you ask suppliers, it's typically more because it's higher cost. Then, where it is possible, we need to make it happen. For instance, thanks to ministry, recently for construction projects, use of green cement has been encouraged, and that's an advantage for us. When the tender offer puts some obligation to use lower clinker, that helps the emissions rate as well. So we need to create that demand as well to make this transition successful.
Yeah, no, very true. And the question of whether people will pay more for sustainable products and services, that's the question of the decade, really.
Yes.
What incentivizes them to want to change their behavior? It's a very big psychological, political problem as well. So the cost effectiveness of decarbonization, and you're absolutely right. I wanted to just flag, you had mentioned the needs of this financing gap as being in the hundreds of trillions. I wanted to point out our Director of Sustainability Research, Emre Tiftik, who writes some wonderful work on green capital flows. Unfortunately, we're only talking about billions now. We still are some way from the trillions, but I would say that is definitely something we have to watch. So thank you for those remarks. Bora, let me turn to you here. So, thinking about what everybody has said so far, what do you see as the big opportunities to really scale up sustainable and transition finance here in Turkey? And what insights can you share from DenizBank's own transition finance activities?
Thank you. Actually, first Izlem made a very good introduction, and Mahmut made it very clear how serious the issue is. So first of all, if we would like to put it in a context, so even I don't like to talk about opportunities, Sonja, because when we talk about opportunities, seemingly we talk about something nice to have. But it's not something nice to have. It's a matter of survival. We all know that. So going forward, actually, on one hand, while talking about sustainability, we looked for a metaphor to define the situation we are in. So we resembled this situation like, you know, there is in Greek mythology, there's the ship of Theseus. So it's something, all the parts of the ship replaced gradually at one at a time over the years, but eventually at the end of this process, it's a new ship, completely new ship. So we are in a similar position. So a very serious matter of survival, and also maybe we are experiencing something at the scale of industrial revolution, but at the speed of digital revolution as well. So all in all, but let's be optimistic. First of all, let's talk about the financial sector. I believe financial sector, is the most disciplined organizations in the world to cope with these kind of issues. Especially, in Turkey, Ekrem Bey knows it very well, how Turkish banks are resilient to cope with the changing regulations, adapting for survival and difficult market conditions. So, all in all, I resemble financial sector like the army forces, but in the peace periods. So, for that reason, without the financial sector's intermediary function, we could not achieve these sustainability goals. I'm 100% sure on that. Going forward, if you come back to DenizBank case, we give utmost priority to capacity building first. So we are establishing the infrastructure to improve our ESG disclosure capability, and fit it in all activities. So because measurement is everything, and without measuring, you cannot manage anything. So we have 4 main pillars to build up. So first thing, we are assessing our loans, not only project finance loans, all loans, maybe excluding household loans, but all loans from ESG perspective. So, and second, we are integrating our climate risks into our risk management policies. This is also a very important thing to do. And thanks to our supranational partners, EBRD, IFC, we got technical assistance from them. So they made our life more easy going forward. Third, and maybe the most important one, carbon footprint. Yes, our own carbon footprint is something, but we can manage it. So because we are, we can invest to solar energy investment, and we can neutralize our carbon footprint easily. However, finance emissions is the main issue. How we can handle our customers, our loans, finance emissions, and how we can help them to manage that. So in this context, we have become the first Turkish bank to be a member of PCAF, Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. So, and also, we commit ourselves to disclose this, to disclose our emissions and everything, and to commit ourselves to neutralize it. And finally, we finalize our sustainable finance framework. Now it's up and running. We expect it will enable us to a positive impact, especially in our strategic sectors, because DenizBank is quite active in agriculture, in tourism, in shipping, energy, and infrastructure, which is quite important from sustainability perspective. So at the same time, during our sustainability journey, we also became the first Turkish bank to include agriculture and food safety category regarding our micro-farmer loans. So this is very important from immigration perspective. This is very important for food safety, and also Turkey is an agricultural country. So we have more than 600,000 farmer customers. So we need to educate them. We need to help them in their transition journey as well. So going forward, we talked about transition. So regarding transition finance, DenizBank priorities will be, first of all, supporting transition finance in energy. For the time being, 97% of the new capacity is coming from renewables. So Turkey is already started, is moving. So, and for the financial sector, our responsibility is to support this process as much as possible. And second thing, social financing is very important from our perspective because we are working with farmers, we are supporting them. All the Turkish banks are very active with the women in finance. So social financing is also quite critical for Turkey's case. And number three, unfortunately, we have a big hard-to-abate sectors. So dealing with these hard-to-abate sectors and supporting the transition efforts like Japan is doing is, I believe, a big responsibility and target for the Turkish banking sector, all, and DenizBank as well. Finally, you know, there is EU Green Deal and there is CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I didn't know that in a couple of months ago. Turkey is number 2 country, which would be affected from CBAM. So in this category, we have $9.1 billion of exports to EU. But anyway, 40% of our exports are to the EU. So going forward, there is no guarantee that EU will enlarge the list and include some other sectors as well. So for that reason, definitely, I mean, we should help our customers for the sake of our economy to help them in their transition efforts to carbon capture mechanism whatsoever. Finally, access to customer data, my colleagues mentioned it, especially in the case of millions of SMEs, is an important setback. It's a costly process. I don't know whether there is willingness in the SMEs in order to also manage that. Through our venture capital company, we invested a digital sustainability fintech called Erdem. Now, Erdem developed a low-cost software. It's an international software, by the way, it's not necessarily limited to Turkey, to first measure and then report and reduce emissions with its data-driven platform. We call it Azalt. In English, it's reduce. So we are supporting Erdem initiative, and also they establish a voluntary carbon market to trade excess carbons, etc. So, I mean, transition, we can talk for hours, but I think our time is getting limited. So let me stop here, Sonja.
So interesting. You know, you mentioned sort of net zero being like the industrial revolution at the speed of digital. Let's absolutely hope that that's the case, because that's what we need. And thank you also for mentioning the climate risk piece, our ability to assess climate and transition risk, because, as you say, our regulators are much more interested in how we do this. Education, you know, greening the SME sector, it's a key part of ensuring the demand. So, and digital sustainable fintech, I really like the sound of that. So, Berrin, let me come to you here. Maybe talk to us a little bit, and thank you again for hosting us today, the key priorities and initiatives for Ziraat Bank in transition finance. You've got a really wide client base, so where do you see the big challenges and opportunities?
Thank you, Sonja. First of all, good morning, all. It's again a pleasure to host you in here with our distinguished guests under the organization of Institution of Finance and Bank Association. Thank you. As you have mentioned, Ziraat has an extensive, massive client base, and we have over 1,700 branches all around Turkey. And we are financing 16% of the total Turkish economy, Turkish banking sector. So in here, our core vision is to be a financial institution that constantly creates difference and value and promising more than a bank in every stage. So we consider Ziraat Bank's balance sheet as the balance sheet of Turkey. So we embrace this important mission, actually, and we act simultaneously with the goals of our country, of Turkey. So right now, Grant, green transition is a priority issue, as well as in Turkey and in Ziraat Bank. So we are just considering all sustainability-related studies in our internal organizational structure and in our lending process. Since 2021, we have been gradually building our banking strategy by considering the regulatory steps that Turkey had rapidly implemented. So in terms of these regulations right now, our priority at the moment is to diminish carbon emissions in certain sectors with the scope of Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. So according to the researchers, Turkey becomes, after Russia and China, among the countries that will be mostly intensely affected by CBAM. As you know, our total export volumes, 40% belongs to the European Union. And the share of 5 carbon-intense priority sectors, which is cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizer, and energy, the percent in European Union export is approximately 11%, which is a huge amount. So we must achieve transformation until 2026, especially in the relevant sectors that I mentioned. We have to avoid the significant economic consequences for our country. So, therefore, as Ziraat Bank, we're planning to discuss an agenda that will accelerate investments in energy and resource efficiency, especially in carbon-intensive sectors. So we're also following and will act in accordance with all regulations currently being drafted, especially in the green asset ratio. Well, you know, we are always talking about, in all, my colleagues have in detail explained the regulations, the market, but you know, one of the important subjects to the green transitions, other than these 5 carbon-intensive sectors, is the agriculture, which I think we'll have to talk in detail, maybe in the other section, because it is the highest and the most vulnerable sector. And after energy sector, it has 18% of the total emission volume, which is a high ratio. So, regarding to your question about the challenges and opportunities, let me give a brief explanation. In line with the feedback from our clients and the branch network, we observe that there's an information asymmetry regarding the green transition. As Izlem Hanım and the other participants has already mentioned, we do not have a common language yet. Yes, the banking sector have implemented sustainability and sustainable finance. We are the pioneers. We are doing great. Yes, many of the corporate customers, they're doing very well in the process. But what about the commercials? What about the SMEs? So, in line with the taxonomy and green asset issue and the other regulations, we will having a contact with those SMEs and the commercial sectors in much more positive way, I think, in order to solve the problems. And therefore, at the end of the day, we understand that who closely monitor the transition process on both supply and the demand side will rapidly experience an effective transition process in very near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
One clarification.
Yes.
I told we are number 2 in terms of CBAM-affected countries. Berrin Hanım told number 3. Both of them is correct, as far as I know. Because since Russia was kicked out of trade flows, Russia was number 2nd, but now Turkey became number 2nd as of most recent figures.
You're right, by the way, but we cannot take Russia out of the place.
Well, when we talk about challenges, that's a pretty serious one, right?
Yes,
to be the
yes,
second most affected country in the world globally. That's really, really quite something. We have had such a great time with our first round of questions that we're going to have to really shorten our answers to this second round of questions. So I'll ask you, I'll just keep it just to a minute or so, hit the high points. And Izlem, I want to start with you. Key ESG priorities beyond climate change in Turkey.
Okay, thank you. We all have our concentration on the climate change for many years, but recently we realized that it is not just a climate change issue. In fact, we are responsible for the nature. That's why we have to analyze the risks on the environmental and social side, which seems more difficult, because we learned how to measure the impact of the climate change, but it is difficult to measure the impact of the social risks that any decision we are taking. That's why nowadays we will be starting to have a nature reporting. It will be a big issue, I think, from now on. Why it is important? Because when we look at the consequences of the recent developments, especially on the investment side, we can say that some part of the economy are not included, which means that by implementing the ESG requirements, in fact, we are broadening our concepts, including diversity, equality, and also inclusiveness. This is important because especially a country like Turkey, when we look at the contributions to the economic activity, especially in terms of gender equality, for example, we can say that the labor force participation for women is as low as 30–34%. And there's a huge potential there. That's why we are one of the signers of the United Nations Women Empowerment Principles.
Absolutely, yeah. So nature and social priorities, big things. And Berrin, let me turn to you just very quickly on shifting to sustainable agriculture, a couple of key points there.
Well, that's a critical issue. That's a critical issue because agriculture, which we are very fond of providing funds on favorable terms since 160 years, we are funding the agriculture. We are leading the way in transforming this sector by designing the agriculture ecosystem from the ground up and decarbonizing it. We do not only provide loan, but also we provide consultancy to the sector. So agriculture is our bank's strategic area. So we facilitate, in collaboration with our stakeholders, easy, cost-effective, and high-quality products to the market. We use, in terms of the multinational development banks and the IFIs, we are strengthening this sector by providing national funds from the national and international markets. So we use key performance indicators there, such as increasing the loan volume for young farmers and women farmers, and solar-powered irrigation systems, earthquake loans, and strategic financing for the agriculture system.
It's a big task, moving to sustainable agriculture. Key performance indicators are a wonderful way of tracking progress in that regard. But Mahmut, maybe on the policy front, where do you see the big changes here?
Let me put it these three things. One is we talked about feed-in system, feed-in mechanism. The next innovation for us, or the big driver, is emission transfer system, ETS. And the way, if we set it right, it's going to issue later this year. I'm hoping that the pilot phase will be short. But you need incentives and allowance and transfer of the carbon credit to drive that transformation, number one. So from policy perspective, it's very important. Two things to support this transformation is we talked about how we need to drive sustainability at every client, whether SME or small SME or SME, everybody's life. For that, we need talent as important. Whether this will be supported more to have the right talent in the banking system. And third, I'll go beyond, again, policy, but the innovation we need to drive this transformation. Because as you said, it could be trillions, it could be billions. We don't know as we innovate. And BBVA has invested already through funds to 200 companies, and we plan to invest 1.5 billion euros in VCs that drives innovation at every front of sustainability. And we want to bring that with our sectoral knowledge to the client and that innovation so that we drive the next wave of Turkey's transformation.
Words to live by, markets and innovation. And Bora, you get the last word here. We live in such a geopolitically tense world. What kind of strategies can the private sector take to advance?
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly. I believe we already have a lot of issues regarding sustainable finance. We don't need more. So, Sonja, if I'm not wrong, it's your research, it's your figure, but according to the IEF and OECD, for the time being, we need approximately 6 times more funding per year than currently available. I have seen a figure of $1.2 trillion available funds, but we need 7 trillion per annum. So, and on top of that, look at the global high inflation and look at the interest rates. So it's more than anticipated. So these are not helping either. So it's a kind of funding at the same time. On top of that, polarization is not good no matter how you name it. I mean, fragmentation, friendshoring, whatsoever. To the opposite, no matter what, we should increase cooperation and collaboration, especially if it comes to sustainability issues. So my humble advice is that we should cool down and reverse this friendshoring style things as much as possible, especially when it comes to sustainability. From Turkey perspective, we have significant challenges with this respect. We have CBAM, current account deficit financing, high funding costs, etc. And how we can cope with this finally, our proximity with EU. It might be a big advantage for Turkey if we do our homework right. So we have a very flexible, resilient economic actors. We know how to cope with crisis conditions, volatility. So it's a big plus. And we should continue our ongoing transition from oil and gas to renewables. This is very important. World Bank says Turkey can benefit approximately $15 billion on top of these efforts. And finally, from a global perspective, if we can meet our zero carbon targets, sustainable spending targets, etc., a significant global GDP benefit may occur, this for sure, and up to 26 trillion economic gains can be achieved if we can meet our global carbon targets.
I think it's very well put. We have to achieve sustainability, but in a real world pro-growth context. So this has been a fantastic discussion. I wish we had more time. But thank you all very much. Izlem, Berrin, Bora, and Mahmut. Really appreciate it. Thank you.